Story 1. Some guy at work undid the quick release on my bicycle's wheels and I didn't realize they were loose until I went down a curb and the front wheel rattled. Nearly came off. The next day I confronted my colleagues about it, but nobody confessed. Later that day, the saddle went missing, but I found it in a shelf near the tools. That night, I used epoxy resin to affix box cutter blades to the underside of all the quick releases on the bike. All of them. The next day, one of the guys at work cut his hand up real bad and got sacked for messing around with my property. It was just your average piece of crap. When these two new guys started at the factory, they just messed around. This one guy just took it a few steps farther. He cut up his hand pretty badly. When he came to show me his hand, I said my bike better be where I left it and intact. He had the saddle in his hand, like an idiot, and tried playing keep away, so I grabbed his shoulder and spun him sideways to the ground. He's heavier, but I unbalanced him, and one of the long-running employees grabbed me in a full Nelson and led me to the doorway, which he filled with his enormous frame. I went upstairs and told the bosses to say I didn't think I wanted to work there anymore. I've been there for a few months. They went to get rid of the guy, but I left too, so I guess nobody really won in that scenario. On my way out, I said to the full Nelson door frame guy that I didn't have any hard feelings for him manhandling me out of the room, and he said, "Dude, you were going to kick him in the face." I was like, "No." To be honest, I didn't know what I was going to do. I stood over him like, "Now what, brain?" The bloody-handed mug caught up with me later that month, where I worked for my second job, and showed me his hand. It'd gone infected because he's a bloody moron. That's the lot of it. Whoever did that was teetering on a razor-thin line between seriously injured and a really bad prank. Story 2. Many years ago, management called us all to head office to tell us they were closing our office and were making us all redundant, but they expected us to work out notice or we'd be fired with no reference. The other offices weren't being touched. All my colleagues were having a shouting match with the managing director, so I snuck out to the fire escape and went down to the sales floor, found an unlocked PC, and burned 2 copies of the firm's entire sales database a few minutes apart. Exactly as I suspected, some sneery little prick from a safe office who'd been tasked with keeping an eye on us came up to me a few days later and said,
"We know the 2 copies of the sales database were made, and we know you got one of them because you have the know-how and we'll find who took the other one."
And he said if I didn't hand it over, I'd be fired on the spot. So I opened my briefcase and gave him the CD with it on, and no more was said. I never found out who burned the other copy, and I sold it a couple of months later to another colleague who started her own company with it after I was offered a job in a different industry. So how did they know it was me? I was one of only 3 people who could have done it because we advised clients on databases. The other 2 had alibis by being upstairs and yelling into the manager-director's face in front of the rest of the office and most of HR and the finance director. I guess they had some kind of network event manager they looked at. What I don't get is why they looked. I'd copied it, not stolen it, and used an open PC so I didn't log in or anything. I guess files were monitored, but they had no reason to be suspicious. There could have been CCTV hidden in the office, I suppose. Story 3. I once counterfeited $360. Several years ago, I was studying to receive a degree in graphic design at a college that will go unnamed. As a graphic design student, nearly all of my projects needed to be printed in some form or another. Black and white printers were available for free use throughout the campus, but each page that came out of a color printer would cost the student $1, with specialty printers such as a large format machine being charged $1 per square foot. To simplify the process of facilitating this transaction at the various printers around campus, it was possible for students to purchase $12 punch cards at the school back store. The student would send a print job to a color printer, where the job would be held until an arbiter, librarian, teacher, what have you, could punch the appropriate number of holes out of the student's card and release the job for printing. I bought one of these cards and, being the stingy and unscrupulous graphic design student that I was, saw an opportunity to apply my skills for convenience and profit. I scanned it and recreated it digitally down to the exact stretching of the fonts and misalignment of the punch hole guides. It was all remarkably easy, given my training up to that point with design software, until I encountered a limit to my medium. There was one more security measure that the school used to guard against the exact thing I was doing. A stamped serial number was added to each card that used an ink pad with vibrant red ink. Up until this point, I had gotten lucky. The rest of the genuine card I used as my template was printed in black and white, meaning I could carry out my forgery entirely on the free, unmonitored grayscale printers the school provided. But even if I could get this to a color printer outside the school, the red used was much brighter than what could be believably reproduced with a typical CMYK printer. I had to get creative, using the serial number of the card that had been purchased legitimately and scrambling the last 3 digits so the card would still be in the range of cards sold but wouldn't immediately be traced back to me. I managed to slowly and painstakingly carve a square of linoleum into a perfect recreation of the size and font of the number stamp used by the bookstore. It could only ever produce 1 serial number, but that would have to be enough. With that, I printed 3 sheets of 10 cards and slipped them into my backpack. When I got home, I carefully cut and stamped them, being sure to slightly misalign the stamp a little differently each time. A mix of morality and cautiousness prevented me from ever attempting to sell these cards through a black market back channel to other students or ever using them on projects that were not required for my school assignments. I decided that it would be best to never carry more than 3 on me while at school. The closest time I came to getting caught was when I had a 3x9 job for the large format printer. The technician who ran the machine was quick to point out that the job would cost much more if I purchased it from the school, as opposed to taking it to a professional print shop. I was able to satisfy his curiosity by telling him the print was for a project with an urgent deadline and that I was willing to pay more for the convenience. He shrugged as he punched out 2 complete cards and a few dollars in the third, all of them bearing the exact same serial number. Those 30 cards lasted me my entire education, and I managed to not tell another living soul until this post. Story 4. Paintballing. I was 25 and went paintballing with my friend, who was 23. It was his first time and my 5th or 6th. It was during the middle of a weekday, and for some reason, there were a fair amount of young kids plus their parents. We get checked in, and it's me, my friend, and 10 kids versus 8 kids and 4 parents. We're in a warehouse, and to take charge of setting up positions for the team, there was a main door connecting our side and a small staircase leading to the second floor, which overlooks the enemy side of the warehouse. Knowing that they'd try to flank us upstairs, the ref blew the whistle, starting the match. I told all the kids to rush the main door. What I didn't tell them was that my friend and I would go up the stairs while they attacked. I sounded the charge, and it was horrible. It was like a child version of Saving Private Ryan. I don't know how they got to the main door first, but the first kid on my team to get up from behind cover took several paintballs to the face. The rest rushed in and were quickly mowed down. However, I guess it was a good distraction since my friend and I got upstairs without being noticed. One kid on our side was still alive in the corner, taking heavy fire. The enemy team concentrated on him, allowing us to get the drop on the enemy team. My friend and I had a good time. The kids, not so much. The child version of Saving Private Ryan. Operation Get Behind the Miners. Evil mastermind. Story 5. It was 3 a.m. and a group of us took a car to a McDonald's to buy a load of food for a party. Long story short, a brawl breaks out at McDonald's between 5 hammered guys and 2 sober guys. Me and my friends join in, trying to break it up and end up being on the sober guy's side. Tables and chairs are flying around, etc. My most intoxicated friend, hammered and baked, is standing there, too messed up to do anything, and decides to contribute by swiping a big bag of food. Eventually, the cops arrive and half of them give chase to the 5 hammered guys who barely manage to stumble to their cars, crashing over curbs in the parking lot. A few cops stay behind to sort it out with those of us left over. I gave them a brief statement and they let me go. We get into our car and our friend is there. Look guys, you got us some food. I take one look at the big bag and ask him if the bag has a receipt for $33 and change. His eyes go wide. How did you know that? Good job, you swiped our food. Story 6. I had an old high school buddy who was working under me. We became friends, but his performance was really terrible. I ended up firing him, but he was understanding and we decided to still remain friends. To make it up to him, I decided to be his wingman for this girl I had been talking about for a while. It sounded like it wasn't going well and I was going to help him lock it down. She and I have been married for 6 years now. I guess I was really good at setting up romantic encounters and situations, but since they were always at my place, apparently I was really bad at targeting her attention. She did tell me later that she had a speech prepared if he ever made a move on her. It was never on the cards for him. I just sped that along. Story 7. My brother worked at an arcade called Hollywood Connections. Around Christmas time, they hosted a party for employees and their families. For the party, they provided buckets of tokens that you could use to play any of the games, but you had to return the leftovers at the end of the night. I filled both of my cargo shorts pockets full of coins and snuck out to stash them in my mom's car. A couple of months later, my 3rd grade class went on a field trip to the same arcade, and I sold the tokens for 4 for $1 instead of the usual price of 3 for $1. I made $85 that day. Ooh, this sneaky little monster. A 3rd grader with top-tier filching skills. If you're as mind-blown as I am by this pint-sized ninja, hit the like button and join the sub-squad. You've got a treasure chest of secret antic stories coming your way. Story 8. This happened when I was a kid. I was walking down the street and coming the other way was a blind guy with a cane and he was taking up most of the sidewalk, so I tried to do a bit of a jog and jump around him, but that thing happens when something goes between your feet and you end up kicking it, so the dude's cane goes flying. And, okay, I can still redeem myself here, right? Well, I didn't. I just ran for some reason. I mean, I guess my logic is that he couldn't see me anyway. Worst of all, I'm sure it looked to bystanders like I just kicked this dude's cane away like a scumbag. Story 9. In 2008, my ex-girlfriend and I got an apartment together. We went to Walmart for supplies, and when we went to pack up the car, we realized the microwave and the shelf underneath hadn't been scanned. The door greeter had even checked our receipt. We figured we'd keep it since we didn't intend to steal it, and 2 layers of security had missed it as well. Plus, I was afraid of being accused of stealing if we tried to go back and pay for it. I might not be convicted, but there goes the rest of my day and a bunch of my money to a lawyer. Story 10. When I was in high school, I was talking about a game I played with a friend. This guy in my class jumped into the conversation saying he played as well. I invited him over to play some hot seat versus each other in the computer. It turns out he wasn't as good as he said he was. Actually, he was quite terrible. After a few weeks of him coming over, I had enough and tried to politely say that this would be our last game. He really didn't want to stop our weekly game night because he had no friends. I don't know why, but I told him the game was getting boring, but if we were to bet $20 a game, it would make it interesting again. I didn't think he would agree, but he did. I played practically every week for the last 2 years of high school. I won every single game. I'm torn on this one. On the flip side, it's kind of messed up that he had to pay for companionship, but hey, at least he had one buddy, even if it was a paid gig. Story 11. In 6th grade, my 3 friends and I were the cool girls. Haven't been cool since. This one girl wanted to be friends with us so bad, but we didn't really like her. She wouldn't leave us alone, so I decided to tell her she could be our friend, but she'd have to change a little bit. I proceeded to make a 2-page list of all the things she would have to change about herself if she wanted to be our friend, like get contacts, cut her hair, or start wearing etnies. So cool at the time. She ended up showing her mom the list and we all got in trouble. She didn't come to school for a while. I never talked to her again. A couple of years later, she and I ended up at the same soccer clinic. I had developed cystic acne and she got super hot, so I guess she won out in the end. Story 12. I used to work at a vet. My coworker was a royal witch and wouldn't feed the animals enough food. Less cleanup is what she said. And she wouldn't give them a bed, so they were essentially sleeping on steel or concrete with a mountain of blankets going unused. I'd had enough. She would hide the vet cleaning supplies in her coffee pot along with them, like any of us were using them. We had the office pot. So one day I was alone in the building and decided to hunt everything down. I found her coffee pot and left it, but first I hocked a big loogie in the water reservoir. I did this for months. It was so damn justified to see her drink her coffee. And yes, I confronted her on the other issues, but she maintained how right she was. I just go after she left and properly feed and care for the animals. And right before I quit, I got some dissolving laxatives and placed them in the water reservoir of her pot. Story 13. So I was managing a cafe in an office building that also had a doctor's office. We had this one doctor that would like to remind me every day that she came in that she was a vegetarian and kept kosher. Clearly, this was not a kosher kitchen. She was always busy and had the habit of jumping the line to ask questions, delaying other people because of her perceived importance. So she wasn't one of my favorite people to deal with. Couldn't use the same knife to cut her sandwich as someone's that touched meat, etc. So one day, while I was making sandwiches for a line of guests, she stopped to ask me if the corn chowder was okay for her to eat. Without thinking about it, I said yes and moved on. A couple of hours later, it dawned on me that I had rendered some bacon while sauteing the onions for the chowder. Clearly not vegetarian and definitely not kosher. The next day, she came in to tell me how much she loved the chowder. I felt bad, but not enough to tell her because she was a huge pain. Story 14. Maybe not that unethical, but I felt pretty bad at the time. I was at the bar and started chatting with a really cute girl by the pool tables. Sadly, it turned out she had a boyfriend, but because she took a liking to me, she said she'd introduce me to her cute friend Beth. She said that I'd really like Beth. I said, sure, introduce me to Beth. So we walk around to the bar area and I realized who Beth was. A 300-pound massive woman sitting at the bar, literally taking up 2 chairs. I got out of there in milliseconds and disappeared right as the other girl was tapping Beth on the shoulder. They never even saw me leave. They must have turned around and looked with confusion at the empty space that I had left behind. I felt bad because what I did was rude, but in all fairness, the other girl was also misleading. Since I'd already expressed interest in her and since she looked nothing like Beth, she should have guessed I would not be interested in Beth. Okay, let's be real here. That disappearing act was a tad uncouth, but who could blame the guy? He was expecting a cute clone, not a Beth-sized blockbuster surprise. Story 15. I was about to be phased out of a job where I was basically in management at an airport. The company made me train my replacement, cut my hours so I wouldn't get benefits when my 1-year mark came up, and took me off my usual duties to make me wait tables. Around the same time, they changed their policy about the military discount, and it would no longer include alcoholic drinks or adult menu items. So you have these guys heading off to their next deployment, only God knows where, possibly into contact. The company would only apply their military discount to the children's menu and soda or whatever. So since my 2 weeks was already in and I already had a new job lined up, I was actually going to be leaving for BCT myself in a few months, although that didn't pan out. I made sure I was the one waiting for the men and women in uniform, and I would bring up their meal, no matter what it was, as a kid's menu version. If they ordered a bottled beer, I was free to bring that to them myself, but if they ordered mixed drinks, I would have my favorite bartender, who was also about to quit, not that the company knew it, make their drinks. Always using a fresh bottle, since the ones in the back of the bar almost always had fruit flies by the hundreds in them. Unethical? Only a few were my former employers who missed me out of health benefits right when Obamacare was kicking in. Story 16. I used to play a game called Ultima Online when it was one of the most popular MMOs. Well, during this time, a few weeks after player housing was patched, I discovered an interesting trick. When reading the deed to a house, it didn't really matter where your character was on the screen as long as you could click the house sign to open the menu. So at least once a week, I'd place the cheapest home you could buy out in front of a castle, then proceed to advertise the sale of a fully furnished castle for a very nice price. I'd find a buyer and we'd travel to the castle steps to make the sale. I'd click not on the castle sign, but my crappy 20,000 gold HUD and proceed to sell the castle for a couple million gold and teleport away before the poor knew what happened. I earned so much gold during the next few weeks that I could buy anything I wanted and the game just got boring and I quit. I can still imagine the rage those players must have felt when they realized they've lost not only months' worth of farming gold, but in most cases months' worth of farming their entire guild's gold that they worked hard for to buy a castle. I never felt such a rush when those trades would complete. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you made it this far, I'm sure you'll also enjoy. What's the most messed up way to get revenge? Story 6 is crazy hilarious. See you in that video.